welcome to the Kickpoint Playbook webinar. I'm Dana DiTomaso, founder and lead instructor here at Kickpoint Playbook. And it's April, which for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere usually means spring cleaning, and your GA4 account is no exception. Today, I will be walking through what it means to check in on your GA4 account and really look for any dust that's gathered and sweep away the cobwebs. All right, that's enough metaphors. So please make sure to ask questions in the chat. I will cover those as I go. And if you have to drop out early, we will be emailing everyone who registered on LinkedIn a recording of today's session. But if you have a question, you want to make sure I cover it in the recording, please make sure to drop it in the chat on LinkedIn or on YouTube. I can see both of those. And we'll also be emailing everyone who registered on LinkedIn a checklist that I've created for today's webinar. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hop over to the Kickpoint Playbook LinkedIn page. The hop over was not an Easter pun, although I realize it probably sounds like it. And just register there or message me and then I can help you out. All right, and now let's get this rolling. So usually when I do these presentations, it's not just me, there's someone else here and I can click all these buttons in the background, but obviously it's just me today. So you're gonna have to bear with me as I get things just a little bit set up for the presentation. All right, there we go. I think we're all set. All right, so just a reminder, make sure to ask questions in the chat. We'll definitely get to them at the end or after each individual section. I did leave lots of time for questions, so if you have any sort of questions or just like general, want to complain about GA4 or Google Tag Manager or Looker Studio, this is your therapy session. Feel free to leave some comments and I'm happy to answer really any questions beyond just spring cleaning. Like this is your chance to ask me whatever you'd like, you know, within reason. All right, so let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, GA4. Now, I went back when I was making this deck to think like, when did I actually start working with GA4? And it was back in 2019. I created my very first GA4 property almost 6 years ago now. And I know that with COVID, you know, time it doesn't have any meaning anymore, but 6 years is a long time to be working with this product that, you know, is kind of iffy sometimes. What is now called GA4 was originally called App Plus Web in 2019, and that was launched in July, so almost 6 years ago. And then that was renamed to GA4 in October 2020. And I remember because it was the day after my birthday, and I took that day off, and I was like, oh, good, another analytics product to learn. And this is what led me to where I am now. But as a result of working on this product for so very long, I have seen some stuff. I've worked on hundreds of GA4 implementations for lots of different websites, large and small. And because I've seen some stuff, I find honestly the easiest GA4 properties to work with are the ones that have been kind of left alone with the basics. I kind of call that benign neglect. Like you don't have someone in there who's like, I know what I'm doing. They've screwed everything up. You just have someone who's like, yeah, this seems fine. And they've done nothing. The done nothing properties are so much easier to fix than the ones that have all sorts of weird stuff going on. It's like when you buy a house and some sort of amateur flipper has been in there and done all sorts of horrible things. And as you start to rip things away, you're like, oh no, why did they do these things? That's the kind of GA4 property I don't like working on, but they happen quite a lot. And really, you know, the other ones I've seen too that are kind of nightmares are ones where there's 5 people all working in their own little fiefdoms and none of them talk to each other and they're all using their own naming conventions for events and campaigns. They haven't communicated with anyone else about this stuff at all. Those are the most difficult to work on fixing up. So hopefully you are working on with a benign neglect GA4 than a flipper GA4. But either way, I'm going to walk you through and show you what to look for. In this presentation, I've put together some of the most common issues I find when performing GA4 audits. And to prepare for this presentation, I went through really, I think about 50 different audits and just did a quick review of all the stuff I found in the past couple of years when I look at GA4s. I also have some resources I'm going to share at the end, plus we're going to talk about a complete course that I've developed that's going to show you how to do GA4 audits from start to finish that we're launching very soon. So if you do need to leave the stream early, remember you haven't registered yet on LinkedIn, please make sure to do that so you'll get an email with the replay and the links, or you can just message me on LinkedIn or via my link tree. All right, so let's get into it. Why should you spring clean your GA4? I mean, it seems like something that seems important, but obviously you probably have 8,000 other things to do on your to-do list, so why should you bother with spring cleaning your GA4? And the major reason is because bad data leads to bad decisions. You really want to make sure your data collection is as accurate as possible. What you don't want to do is make calls on budget or what's working and what isn't working based on data that isn't reflecting what's actually happening for visitors on your website, because you've got that bad data that you're working on, or you're working with rather. You could also be hiding, frankly, wins based on poor attribution. Something that I see quite a lot with bad attribution is really valuable traffic ends up in the unassigned channel in GA4. And I call that channel kind of the junk drawer of GA4. Like, there's some useful stuff in there, but you got to root around to find it. You don't necessarily think about it until you need something and you're like, where is our baker's twine or our, bag clips or whatever they are? They're in the junk drawer, but you don't think about it until you actually need it. So I don't like having things end up at unassigned. It's not ideal. And that happens quite a lot when people are using sources and mediums that aren't recognized by default in GA4 and no one has cleaned it up or created custom channels. That can be really frustrating, and it's a great way for you to completely lose any sort of valuable traffic that you have. And also, frankly, GA4 needs regular maintenance, just like anything else, like your car, like your WordPress website. You really do need to go in there every once in a while and be like, all right, is this thing working as it should? It needs an oil change, just like anything else. So there is some stuff you should really be checking regularly, and I'm going to go over all of that today. First off, we're going to look at potential configuration issues. These are usually the kinds of things that are set up originally, they're forgotten, and then no one looks at them ever again, even if they're set up wrong. The first thing I want you to check, believe it or not, there's still an option. Sorry, I just dropped something here. There's still an option to see if your GA4 is connected to Universal Analytics. This is hiding in the web stream details under Managed Connected Site Tags. And if you see this, click on where it says One Connected, and you'll see a UAID just hanging out there. Now, what you absolutely need to look for if you see this is UA code on your website, or if you still have UA tags in your Google Tag Manager container. If you do, you really want to make sure that that is not actually how GA4 is getting their data, is via the UA connection, because by now we're well past the sunset. You should be using GA4 data collection instead. Believe it or not, I do still see this sometimes. This is actually a real live screenshot that I took as I was making the presentation last week. So it's mostly on properties that were set up in the UA to GA4 migration process pretty early on, and then no one really looked at them. It was kind of left alone, so you didn't end up with actually any changes being made. So just look for that. And what you want to make sure, as I said, that UA data is not, or pardon me, UA is not the reason how or why data is getting into GA4. You want to make sure it's GA4 data collection, and if that's the case, then you could probably shut this off. But you need to check that out first. Next thing I want you to check are under the property details. This is where you're looking at the time zone and the currency. This is something that's set up when you first create GA4, and people probably don't even think about it. And sometimes it's not right. Let's say, for example, I'm on Pacific time. I could be working with a client in, say, Europe, and maybe they're on Central European time. When I set up a property for them, if I do that, it may set my default to be Pacific time. And then if I don't realize and I don't change it, then all their data is going to be in Pacific time, which is less than ideal for a couple different reasons. And I'll get into that in the next slide. Now, if this is not right, if the currency isn't right or the time zone isn't right, do not change it just yet, because it's really going to cause some weirdness in your data. When you change the time zone in particular, it can create a gap or a doubling of data depending upon which way you're going. For example, let's say I'm on Pacific time, and let's say, my client's on Eastern time. Well, someone set up their property for them, and right now the property is set to Pacific time, but they're Eastern time. If I then switch the property from Pacific to Eastern, what's going to happen is I'm going to lose 3 hours, because right now, let's see, it's just after 9 o'clock Pacific time. It's just after noon on Eastern time. So GA4 thinks it's 9 a.m. Great. And then I'm going to switch it to Eastern. GA4 thinks, oh, it's noon now. Cool. And then you're going to have 3 hours of nothing in your GA4 property. And if I did the opposite, where I went from Eastern to Pacific, then you would end up with 3 hours of double traffic in your GA4 property. So obviously this is kind of unavoidable if your time zone is wrong, but it is something that you need to discuss with people beforehand. Let everyone know, add an annotation, because we have annotations now, and then make sure to know when you're going to do this, maybe on a Sunday so the traffic isn't as high, for example. You just want to consult with people before you make that change, because it does impact your data. And then people might say, well, you know what, that's annoying. I don't want to change my time zone and double up on my traffic. Does that time zone actually matter? And one way it can matter is how GA4 handles sessions that span midnight. What happens is that you end up with two sessions. So I'm here, in Pacific time, and I'm visiting a website that's, say, Central European time. And that means that, their midnight is my 5 p.m. So if I'm on the website at 5 p.m. and then it crosses over to, say, 5:01 p.m., what's going to happen is they're going to see two sessions from me. One will be on the first day, which is still the same day for me, but it's two different days for them. And if you have a lot of people ending up going over midnight because of that, you could end up with some inaccuracies in your data as a result. You end up with two sessions, and then the second session on the second day actually doesn't get attributed because it's sort of broken off from that first session. So depending upon where most of your customers are, this is obviously tricky if you're a worldwide business. If you're a huge organization like, say, Expedia helps people around the world, what time zone do they possibly set, right? You just kind of have to suck it up and just pick a time zone. But in most cases, where most of your customers are, and you should pick a time zone that's appropriate for your GA4 and who's coming to it. Now, what happens if you change the currency? This is also kind of a big deal. If you change the currency, GA4 will automatically convert previous currency amounts to the new currency based on the previous day's exchange rate, which may or may not be useful. So one situation where I did change the currency quite recently actually was when the currency on the site was set to US dollars, but the company was actually sending amounts to GA4 in Canadian dollars, and the currency code with the data going off to GA4 was set to Canadian. And then GA4 was using currency conversion to change the amount coming in Canadian dollars to US dollars. So all their purchase amounts in GA4 looked individually for transactions lower than what they were seeing in their e-commerce platforms because the US dollar is stronger than the Canadian dollar. And so that's an easy change to make. To switch to Canadian dollars in that case makes a lot of sense. Temporary pain, but then it starts to match better with what we see in their e-commerce software. But if you, again, transact in multiple currencies, you are going to run into this issue, and then you're going to have to pick the currency that makes the most sense for you. Something else, just check this right now while I'm talking to you. Open up your GA4 in another window, and then go into the data retention settings. And this is under the admin, under data retention. By default, it is set to 2 months. You just want to change this to 14 months. This is not a communicate it with other people kind of situation. Just go ahead and change it. This is a misconception here, and I think when GA4 first came out, people saw this and they were like, oh no, this means GA4 is going to get rid of my data after 2 months. Not quite. Your general reports, your standard reports, everything you see in the reporting menu is still going to work just fine. What this impacts are explorations specifically. So if you have this set to 2 months, you change it to 14 months, it does not magically make 12 months of data come back, unfortunately. It only starts collecting during the moment that you turn it on going forward. And it only applies the data in explorations. And you think, I'm not using explorations. I don't care. At some point, you're going to use explorations, whether you like it or not. And you are going to be sad that you did not change this value. And it is automatically set to 2 months by Google because they are trying to save money. It is deeply annoying. It is one of the first things I always do when I create a new GA4 property. So just go on in there, into admin, data retention, set that to 14 months, hit save. Thank me in 12 months from now when you have more data. All right. So that is it for that section we're going to go over. I don't necessarily see any questions specifically on this. There is one question from a LinkedIn user. Sorry, I can't see your name in here that says, can you say again exactly where this is? I'm not sure where this is what you're referring to. I'm sorry, I didn't see when you actually asked the question. So if you don't mind adding a little bit more information into the chat, then I can definitely address this. And we move on. Yeah, Lindy just said, there will be a time you want to look at it. Been there, done that. Yeah, it's just go ahead and add it in now. Oh, and here's a great question from Dina. Doesn't the data retention setting also impact some looker reports? It does not impact the API. So it can impact some things that come out, like if you have custom dimensions and stuff. This is where the jury's a little bit out still, like what does it actually impact, what doesn't it impact? What I would say too, and I'm going to talk about this at the end, also make sure to export to BigQuery. Same thing, you're like, I'm never going to use BigQuery. You might. Just do it. Just set it up. And yeah, so just take a look at, sorry, I just got a note. The person was asking for that. Yeah, it may impact some Looker reports, but again, it just depends on like what you're going for. But there are some special metrics that are only available in explorations, like entrances and exits. That's the kind of data that is not retained, and you can't go into explorations longer than 14 months. But you can definitely pull that data into GA4 and Looker Studio for well over 14 months. The only problem you run into at that point is the quota issues. So if a lot of people are looking at your reports at once, you will run out of what are called quota tokens in Looker Studio, and then your reports won't work for 24 hours, which is obviously less than ideal. So if you're running into that a lot, you're going to need to use a third-party connector like Supermetrics, for example, or you'll have to export to BigQuery, and I can definitely talk more about that at the end, Dina, if you have some more questions about this. Okay. Oh, they wanted to know where I'm just going to go back here. Okay, so where is GA4 connected to Universal Analytics? So to get to this, you click on your admin, and then you click on data streams, and then you click on your data stream, your web data stream, and then you scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see these three settings: configure tag settings, manage connected site tags, and view tag instructions. And actually, in my other window, I have a GA4 open. Okay, great. So hopefully you are seeing that. Yep, you should be. All right, great. So I'll just go in there right now to show you. So you go into admin, and you click on data streams, and then you click on your data stream, your web data stream. Hopefully you only have one. We'll talk about that too. And then you click on manage connected site tags. You can see here, this one has 0 connected. I'll just make this a little bit bigger to make it easier for people to see. There we go. It says 0 connected on this one, but you might see 1 connected. So that's where to go ahead and check that. All right, I hope that helped. Let's go back to the presentation. All right, I'm going to hop ahead now to tracking issues. All right. Well, look at that. How timely. Do you have more than one web data stream? I did say I was going to talk about that briefly, and here it is. Now, in your property, when you go into that data stream setting, if you see more than one web data stream, as the very bad example that I made just for this presentation here, you could have some issues. Now, why would you have more than one web data stream? People thought in the beginning of GA4, they were very sad about not having the ability to make views in GA4, which they did have in UA. And of course, I mean, that's fair. I miss views as well, but views are not coming back. We just all need to move on. And so what they would do instead is they would think, oh, I'm going to make a web data stream, and then that will be kind of like a view, but it's not. What happens is that if you have different parts of your website tracked by different web streams, users are not combined between the streams. So in this example, let's say I'm on the main site, which is just tomates.ca, and then I move to the shop.tomates.ca site, I would show up as 2 different users. The users are not combined between the 2 streams, and then the attribution from how I originally got to the main site would be lost when I moved to the shop website. And we actually tried this out for ourselves in the beginning, because I wanted to see this in action. So I made a different GA4 for ourselves at Playbook, and I had one data stream for our website, and then I had one data stream for all of our all of our Looker Studio templates that we give out, like our audit dashboard and such. And it was so interesting to see people just completely drop off a cliff when they switched from one to the other. So yeah, I've tried it. Don't do it. It's not good. Just make sure you have one data stream. But that being said, if you do have a second data stream, don't just delete it. I've heard mixed results. Google's documentation says that data doesn't go away. Other people who I trust say actually the data does go away. So just label it don't use, make sure data isn't going to it anymore, but just don't delete it just in case. Like, it's not going to hurt anything if you just leave it hanging out there. And hopefully just check it every once in a while and make sure no one's sending any data to it. All right, next question is, are you using enhanced measurement events? I am always surprised when I start working with a new client's GA4 and someone, usually their IT team or web developers, have shut off all the enhanced measurement events for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, this is probably why GA4 made page views grayed out so you couldn't shut it off, because someone would try. But the reality is enhanced measurement is one of GA4's best features. It tracks important stuff like file downloads, form fills, video plays right out of the gate. This is stuff we had to set up manually before in Google Tag Manager. It saves so much more time when it comes to setting up events. I run into properties with these shut off way more than I should. I don't know why they've been shut off. The only time we shut these off is when we've created our own versions of these events that we're sending to GA4 via Google Tag Manager. So in this screenshot, for example, you can see that form interactions are shut off, and that's because for this property, we have created our own form submit event, and that's why. And why would we create our own form submit event? Well, the reason for that is because form interactions can be, a little oversensitive, let's say. I can find it records even when a form isn't successfully submitted. So always when I'm testing a GA4 property, I just submit a totally blank form, and then I see if the form submit event was recorded, even though the form wasn't actually submitted. If you want an easy way to check this, there's a great plugin called Omnibug that you can use that will show you in your developer tools for Chrome, or that's available for a number of different platforms, including Firefox, etc. And it will show you if a GA4 event was firing. And so I just submit a totally blank form, which shouldn't work. If you see a form submit event, then you know that the form submit is over firing. This happens a lot of what are called AJAX forms. And those are forms where, say, the page doesn't reload when the form is submitted. And the reason why this happens, and I'm going to get into technical territory for a second, the reason why this happens is because an AJAX form communicates with the server and says, hey, here's the data. Did we do this right? And the server says, no, go back and try again. But the actual client, which is the web browser, doesn't know whether or not the form is successfully submitted at all. It just knows that a form thing happened. And so Google Tag Manager also knows that a form thing happened, and GA4 knows a form thing happened, but they don't know if it was successful or not. So that's why you need those extra checks on some websites. Usually, more modern type form builders like Gravity Forms, for example. If you use AJAX Gravity Forms for WordPress, you definitely need to turn off the default form submit event. Otherwise, it will record when blank forms are submitted. Okay. So, Dina, Arena, I'm going to get to your question at the end. And Dina, for your question, has GA4 fixed the issue where it was firing a form submit for the metapixel tag? Yes, thank goodness. I was so happy about that. So what was happening there? Technically, the metapixel, and they've also changed the metapixel a little bit too, so this is also partly on Facebook making good changes for once, is what would happen is when the metapixel was submitted, it actually looked like a form submission. And so for a long time, every single time the metapixel would load up, it would actually record a form submit event. Obviously, very bad. GA4 fixed it, Meta fixed it too, so that shouldn't be happening anymore. But again, that's a great example of what to look out for with these kinds of form submits, because there's definitely more than one pixel vendor out there, and not all of them are necessarily responsible in terms of how they fire their pixels. So thanks for bringing that up, Dina. I appreciate it. Okay. Next question. Is Google Signals enabled? Should it be? Now, yeah, this is like a just because we could doesn't mean we should kind of question, like Jurassic Park. Just because we could make the dinosaurs, should we? So in the data collection part of the admin, you'll see the Google Signals option, and by default, it is off. Should you turn it on? All right. So if you're dealing with a property that serves customers in the European Economic Area or other areas in the world with specific data protection requirements, like, say, South Africa, Quebec now, for example, I say no, unless you've consulted with a data privacy or legal expert, which I am not. I set up consent management tools, but I am not a lawyer. And don't sue me if you turn it on and you get fined. Just going to say that. I always leave it. I always defer this to the client and say, check with your legal team, check with your data privacy team. Most large organizations or medium organizations dealing with the European Economic Area will have a data privacy officer that they deal with either in-house or someone they've contracted on the outside. And so they can advise on whether or not they feel comfortable turning this on for the client. You really do need that go ahead, and it shouldn't necessarily come from you unless you are a data privacy expert. If so, good for you. But even if it is turned on, don't assume that the person who turned it on checked with the right people. I have seen so many situations where the PPC team is told by the Google Ads help on the Google side, those helpers who actually give you bad advice and just make you spend more money with Google Ads. They've been told, oh, just go ahead and turn that on. And so the PPC team doesn't think about it. They just turn it on. And then you've got this huge potential fines you're opening up your client to. So realistically, don't turn this on without checking. And even if it is turned on, double check and make sure that the right checks and balances were done when it was turned on. And if you shouldn't be using it, shut it off. Just definitely make sure and go ahead and check that. All right, so that's the end of that section, and I don't see any more questions hopping in. So yeah, Arena, I'm going to get to your question definitely at the end. All right, let's keep on going. Next section rather, is traffic and channel issues. Everyone's favorite, unassigned traffic. unassigned traffic, as I mentioned, this is the junk drawer of GA4. You could end up with some super good stuff going in here. For example, this particular GA4 property has traffic from Clutch, but Clutch is using a medium of referral underscore profile, so it ends up in unassigned. If the medium was just referral, then it would go into referral traffic. I could, in this case, create a channel for Clutch, or I could modify the referral channel to include a medium of referral underscore profile to include this traffic, but it ends up in unassigned by default, which is sad, and you end up missing out on a lot of good traffic this way. And this screenshot is from our GA4 audit dashboard, which you can get in the resources of our website. We'll also email this link out to everybody. Let's see. Yeah, and sorry, this question here, just we'll get to that at the end as well. Sorry, I need to stop looking at questions. It's distracting me from the presentation. All right. So this screenshot is from our GA4 audit dashboard. You can get that on our website, and we'll email you a link to the dashboard as well in the follow-up email from this presentation. Next thing I want you to look at, also from our GA4 audit dashboard, do you have mixed case sources and mediums? You can see here that this particular company is using title case for their sources and mediums. The issue with this is that Facebook is in title case and Facebook in lowercase. You might think they're the same word. Looks like the same word to me, you'd say. GA4 says, no, totally different words. Do not combine. And it won't combine those two together at all. And you might think, oh, that's fine. I always use title case. I'll just make sure to be consistent. And at some point, someone will forget, or like you'll be on vacation and someone will change all your stuff, and then you'll have mismatched data. I always recommend using all lowercase all the time, so at least you have a standard. All lowercase is easier than trying to tell people, oh, we capitalize this word, but not this word. So for example, you can even see in the sources here, we have social campaign, which is in what's called camel case. So you have social with a capital S and a capital C, and then they have social campaign with a space in between, right? This is the kind of subtle thing that can really get you in trouble. So I usually say, like, just establish a standard, just use all lowercase all the time. And the people of this company are using our campaign tagging tool now and are cleaning up their act, which is great. And we are also going to send you that as well in the email that you get after this. And you can also get it on our website under resources. Just look for the campaign tagging resource. Next question I always look for is, do you have mixed case URLs? Again, this is a screenshot from our GA4 audit template. You can end up with mixed case URLs as well, like you see here. GA4 will not combine different cases of URLs together, even if the words are exactly the same, because of that case sensitivity. And putting my SEO hat back on briefly, you can end up with technical SEO issues here. If you have URLs that resolve with any letter case at all, upper or lower, and you're not using rel canonical tags. So if you struggle with this, let me know. I can send you some resources to help out with this technical SEO issue. Or actually here on LinkedIn Learning, I have a technical SEO course. And if you don't pay for LinkedIn Learning, that's fine. Typically, most libraries give you free access to LinkedIn Learning with your library card. So definitely check that out as well. And I do talk about rel canonical and why it's important to have a single case for URLs if possible. Sometimes it's not always possible, and this is where rel canonical can save you. But certainly that's something to check out. And yeah, you can get that for free with most library card access. Or if you have a LinkedIn Premium account, it's in LinkedIn Learning. All right, let's see. Any other questions coming in for this section? No? All right. We just have the stuff we're going to get to at the end. All right. Now we're going to talk about event and conversion tracking. I still say conversion tracking, even though conversions are technically named to key events in GA4. Still a weird name. I was in Germany not too long ago for SMX Munich, and their key event name is like, I know a lot of German words are long, but this was ridiculously long. And it's because they just literally translated key events. It's not a great call. Google. All right. So one of the first things I look at, and again, this is our GA4 audit dashboard, is if you're tracking not enough or too many events. And sometimes it can be really difficult to strike that balance between tracking too much and not enough. And sometimes it takes some back and forth before you get there, because you have to figure out, after all, what are you tracking? There's the basic enhanced measurement events that come with GA4, but what else are you going to track? And this screenshot is actually from Google's demo GA4 account, which is an example of what not to do, frankly, when it comes to GA4. So one of the events that's here, it's kind of small, I'm just going to move my mouse over it, is San Francisco users, which is just weird. It's just a small amount of events, relatively speaking. Is it important? I don't know. So another example of where we helped a client with this is we had a client who was tracking, say, important things on their website, but they had two distinct audiences they worked with. They worked with a US audience and a UK audience. And so they would do things like tracking CTA button click US, CTA button click UK, and they just had that repeated for every single one of their events. And the reality is it was creating a lot of clutter and it was making it difficult to figure out what was going on. So we ended up changing up those events. So it'd just be called CTA button click, for example. And then you would have a parameter attached to the event that would determine the location. And in the reports, they could just filter for that parameter, and then they could switch over their reports easily from US to UK. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of thinking in terms of what's the best way to capture this important information. I also, I want to come back to this again. Are your form submit events actually tracking form submit events? This is extra important that I put in 2 slides about it because often I'll see, for example, someone has decided to set something up in Google Tag Manager to track forms, but they're just tracking clicks of the submit button. That drives me bananas. Don't track that. That's not actually a form submission. The most egregious I think that we ever saw was when we were working with a new client and they were tracking views of the contact page as a form submission. That is not a form submission, that is a view. And the client was so confused as to why the agency was saying they were getting all these contact form fills, but they saw way less in their CRM. Like, come on, that's not good. Don't do that. So do try to track form submissions as much as you possibly can, ideally. I mean, obviously there's limits to what you can track. I have a long post about that on our website as well, about tracking marketing analytics accurately. It's kind of hard because you have ad blockers and consent tools and everything else. But, if you can track someone and they submit a form, just track it properly. It's don't overinflate it. Don't do that. It's not good for us in the industry. All right. Then the last thing I want to look at in this section is if custom dimensions, custom metrics, and calculated metrics are used. What I'm looking for first is just, are there any custom dimensions and metrics at all? And then I look to see if they're used well. For example, I see a lot of the time that people add page location as a custom dimension, and you really don't need to do that. It's available in lots of different places in GA4 already. And if you do register that, you can end up with something called cardinality. Cardinality is what happens when you have a custom dimension that receives more than 500 unique values in a single day. Then you can end up with sampling or values grouped under this other row, which is really less than ideal. So make sure you're registering just the stuff that you actually have to, register. All right, so let's see. Renee had a good question, actually, so I'm just going to hop back to form submit events. Let's see, Renee, any thoughts on how a form submit event would appear on a page without a form on it? That is a great question. Check if there's on-site search, because technically on-site search, someone typing into the search bar of a website, that's a search, just like anything else. So, for example, I'm just going to hop back into analytics and let's see, I'll just go on the KP Playbook website. So if I just had default form tracking set up and I did a search right now for, say, GA4, what I just did, that is a search. So keep that in mind. Like that is a search as much as anything else. So you could be seeing form submission events showing up even though it was just an on-site search. So that's another reason why to double check your search events and make sure that your form submit events and making sure they're showing up properly. All right. And then Madeline, I'm going to get to your question at the end. It's a good question though. All right, let's hop into governance. So who set up the product links? I always look at the credentials of people who set up the product links, such as between GA4 and Google Ads. So let's say you work at a company, your agency set this up for you, and then you stop working with that agency and you revoke their access and now the connection is broken, which, of course you can reestablish it, but it's a step you shouldn't have to take if you set up the credentials yourself originally with a management account at your organization. So I would say have an analytics at your company whatever account, or communications at, or marketing at account. You can register any email at all as a Google account. You don't need to use a Gmail account, and then use that as a collective account that is used to create these credential connections. You should really own these credential connections. You should not have your agency set them up for you. What I typically do is I will set up a Zoom call with a client and just walk them through how to do it if they're feeling nervous about it, or we have instructions that we send along as well. A lot of the connections are relatively simple. The BigQuery one is a little bit trickier, so I usually do a Zoom call for that for sure. The next thing I want you to look at is how many people have access to the account and property. I think I'm routinely horrified. I would say not often. I'm like, oh, you don't have a lot of people looking at this GA4. It's a lot of people who have access to everybody's GA4s all the time. And so definitely check who has access to the account and property levels and see what level of access they have. This is one property I was recently auditing. They had 15 people who had access beyond just the basic Google Ads connection, and almost all of them were administrators, and our contact at the client side did not know who a lot of these people were. There was a lot of random Gmail accounts. So let's be honest, analytics, espionage, not really a thing. yet. I mean, now that I've willed it into the world, maybe it'll happen. But, it could take one disgruntled employee deletes the GA4, no one checks the mailbox, and boom, your GA4 is gone. So just make sure that the people who have access to GA4 actually should have access to GA4. This is something I really recommend you check monthly, quarterly, at a minimum. Just to make sure that people have access. And I also recommend just have a couple of admins, and then everyone else can be at the analyst level, and then you can promote them if they actually need to do more. The analyst level can customize reports and explorations. They can't turn on key events. And really, that's all you need to do on a regular basis. Anything above analyst, you can turn on key events. And I've seen lots of issues where a PPC person is like, oh, I want to track if people clicked on the CTA button, so I'm going to turn it on as a key event, and now the site's conversion rate's all screwed up. So really, it's just make it the analyst level, and then at least people have to approach you or your client contact if you work agency side before they go ahead and make something that could be a very bad change. And then my new favorite thing in GA4, annotations. I honestly clapped my hands when I saw this because I am a big nerd. But I hope some of you are also as excited about annotations as I am. They are pretty new, and so I'm not necessarily seeing them in a lot of accounts yet, but it's something that I definitely encourage when I do my audits to ask people to start filling it in. Start backfilling all that information now. Hopefully you were keeping track of annotations while we waited for them to show up in GA4, right? Maybe not. Maybe you weren't keeping track of that. It's a great time to start keeping track of that. Start backfilling as you think of things, add it on, establish a naming convention, etc. I am working on a post about how to set up a naming convention and a color coding for your annotations. So look for that. We'll obviously email everybody who's on our newsletter once that's published. But yeah, definitely keep track of your annotations and just start adding them in now. All right, so now what? You've gone through this list of things. You found all sorts of horrifying stuff in the chest of horrors is GA4. So now what are you going to do? You're going to take this list of observations and our checklist, and you're going to get started on data cleanup. As I mentioned, don't necessarily change some things right away, like time zone and currency. You definitely want to communicate this kind of stuff. And also, I've put together a checklist specifically for those of you attending today that goes through all the items that I just talked about. And then I also mentioned at the beginning, I have a GA4 audit course. It is coming out very, very soon, like next few weeks. So please join the Playbook Huddle if you're not already part of our newsletter to get reminded when the GA4 audit course is released. And of course, I will be talking about it everywhere when it comes out. But if you're on the newsletter, then you'll get I'm just saying, you might get a little code to buy it for cheap when it first comes out. All right, so we have a bunch of other questions. Keep asking questions in the chat. I love seeing those questions come in. And now I'm going to get through all these other questions. Okay, so what do we have so far? Let's see. And I'm going to leave the screen sharing up just because I might need to hop into GA4 for some of these questions. So Aureen asks, really liking the Ahrefs web analytics, super neat and granular reports. Any thoughts? I haven't actually used it yet. I barely can keep up on GA4, much less other analytics tools. But now that you've mentioned it, we do use Ahrefs. It is one of the tools that we have a subscription to, so I'll check it out. I think one of the things with any analytics too is people might say, well, Ahrefs looks like it's capturing more data than GA4 is. Just, it's realistically, unless something is tracking what's called server side, if it's client side tracking, which means it's just, on the website in the browser, someone's got an ad blocker, they'll block it from being tracked. In most cases, analytics is just tracking the same stuff. What makes it different is the reporting. And I think this is where people got really mad about Universal Analytics versus GA4 and saying, well, everything's different. Why is everything different? Well, it's just because people have different ways of measuring stuff and reporting on stuff. So if you do see slightly different measurements in different tools, great. Using a tool like Ahrefs, I'm not mad at it. I think the only thing I would worry about generally is relying on it in the long term. What if they get rid of that product or change it? Then I wouldn't want to lose out on that analytics, right? And not that I'm saying Ahrefs is going to go out of business or something, but their priorities could change and they could get rid of the product. The same thing could happen with Google, really. Well, realistically, I don't think GA4 is going away anytime soon. And hopefully we don't have GA5 coming out anytime soon because I'm still tired from GA4. All right. Let's see. Aureen, I hope that answered your question. Now let's see. This is just LinkedIn user. So if you have your privacy setting in LinkedIn to say don't show your name, that you just come up as LinkedIn user. So I don't know who you are. I'm sorry. My GA4 is showing traffic, but under data streams, I get this. Data collection is active for your website. Yeah, this can show up for like the first 72, sometimes a week after you've set it up. So the important thing is making sure that you actually have data going into your GA4. If you just set it up in the past few days and you see this, Google's being Google, don't worry about it. You see the traffic, we know it's working. They'll catch up eventually. If it's been a couple weeks and you're still seeing that warning, I might wonder what's up, and I'd probably take a look and make sure that like all the pages of your site actually have the tags on them, for example. That might be something to look at. But usually this is just should go away after like 48 at 72, sometimes a week. One time I saw a week. I don't know why. Google, am I right? Like that's half of the time I spend in GA4, I'm like, Google. So it's not you a lot of the time. I hope that helps. All right, Dina asked, regarding AI traffic that shows up under unassigned, should we just wait for Google to catch up and assign it to an appropriate channel? Google might, but I have a solution for you. In the meantime, let me just load up the Kickpoint Playbook website, and under our resources, this is so timely. I have how to track and report on traffic from AI tools in GA4. This actually walks you through how to set up a custom channel group in GA4 for things like ChatGPT, etc. So you can get this on the website. I actually have this. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. This very long piece of regex code here. So you just paste that into your channel group. I've already done the nerd stuff for you, so you don't have to do it. And then that will create an AI tool for you in GA4. So I'd recommend using that instead of waiting for Google to do it, because I mean, partly Google could, but also part of the reason why it's showing up as unassigned is that ChatGPT has made poor choices in how they set up the source and medium. They're just sending, I can't remember which one it is. They're just sending either source or medium, and they should be sending both, and they're not. And so this is really a ChatGPT problem, not a GA4 problem. But this particular piece of regex I'm showing you on the screen here will fix this problem. So you can do that. All right, Madeline, do you know the best way to track indirect conversions in Looker Studio on an asset-based basis? For example, conversions from users who viewed a piece of content, went to another page, and then converted. Yes. This is where I would use audiences quite a bit. So an audience in GA4, I'm just going to hop into audiences so we can talk about this. This is my demo account, so I set up lots of weird things in here. But you can say, for example, people who have viewed a specific page. So this is people who've come from, say, Google Business Profiles or not. This is a demo account that I use when I'm setting up my courses. What you could do is you could create an audience of people who viewed, say, resources content and then converted. You could also create a segment in explorations as well of people who have viewed a specific piece of content and then did convert. And so let's see, what are we at for time? 9:40. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hop on to the next question, and then I will come back and I will do a quick exploration for you on how to do this, because that's a great question, Madeline. So hold on, we'll come back to this. All right, way too many not set reports. What can we do to reduce them, get more helpful data? Yeah, not set kind of sucks. So not set is going to show up for anything that came in the last 24, 48 hours, because GA4 takes its sweet, sweet time categorizing data to sources and mediums. That part sucks. So if you have been reporting on the 1st of the month, stop doing that. Start sending your reports out on, say, the 3rd, 4th, even the 5th of the month. Unfortunately, GA4 likes to take time to do attribution. I don't know why. It seems weird. They're a large company. They have lots of computers. Why does it take so long? So it is something that I wish they would do faster. And if you have a ton of not set showing up on the site, I'm just going to grab a tab and I'm going to show you a couple of reasons why I typically see some not set issues, one of which I saw actually quite recently. I'm just going to load up in this other window because I don't want you to see all my client accounts. Our default container that we use for really simple website implementations. So one of the things that we set up is the Google tag needs to be set on initialization, all pages, not all pages, all page views. This is a really common mistake that I see. And the reason why is this configuration tag has to go first. So initialization means the very first thing that the container does when it loads up on the site if you're using Google Tag Manager. If you're using the GA4 code directly on the website, don't need to worry about this. This is just for Google Tag Manager. But check your tags and make sure that it's running with initialization. This is a tag that was added not when GA4 tags first came out. It is something I had to go back in and add in again, like I think a couple of years ago was when it first came out. So definitely double check and make sure you're running on initialization all pages. The other reason why you could have this is, let's say, for example, here I am on our website right now, and I've been looking at this blog post, and let's say, I have other things to do. I have a meeting now. I'm giving a presentation. And so I'm going to let this sit for an hour, and then I'm going to come back to it again. And then when I start using it again, let's say I'm going to click on one of these table of contents links. So what's happened is my session is timed out. My session is ended because I left the tab open for a long time and I didn't do anything with it. And then I'm going to click on this table of contents piece. Now, the problem here is that we are tracking events when you click on any of these table of contents pieces. I'm tracking every time an image loads up in your browser. Like, our site has a lot of tracking. But because you didn't reload the page, you didn't restart your session, Google doesn't have a session to attach the event of this table of contents click or this image view to attach it to. And so what ends up happening is you have a new session startup because the event has to be captured somehow. But because there was no page reload, there was no session start, it shows up as not set for the source medium and as the landing page. So in my course Practical GA4, I go through how to create an exploration that will show you where people are probably hoarding tabs. In the course Analytics for Agencies, I also have built into our default container that we give you with that course a way to tell if people are hoarding tabs for a long time. Hoarding tabs is, I don't know, I don't want to necessarily call it a problem. I don't hoard tabs, other people do. But lots of people hoard tabs forever, and that's fine. I'm only judging you a little bit. But the reality is that GA4 times out. And sure, one quick solution is you could change the GA4 default timeout to be 7 hours and 55 minutes. That's the longest you can go. But people are going to keep tabs open for weeks, months, years, And so in that case, what can you possibly do? So you're always going to have that small percentage of people who hoard tabs. But if that percentage is, say, more than like 5%, you may have a configuration issue going on, and that's where I would look at Google Tag Manager or something else and see if that's what the issue is. So I hope that helps. I know it's a super tricky problem. I am hoping that I'm going to be able to talk to Google about this actually directly, but they kind of know it's an issue. It's just like, how would you solve it, right? And I think that's the struggle that they have right now is how would you solve that particular problem? Okay, so let's go back to Madeline's question. All right. The best way to track indirect conversions in Looker Studio on an asset-based basis. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to create an exploration. And I'm just going to create a quick funnel exploration just to get some data in here real quick. So what I'm going to do, you can see some default segments come in. And what I want is I want to add in a dimension of a page path. So I'm going to look at page path here. Let's say we're going to do page path and screen class, which, by the way, page path and screen class and page path is exactly the same if you're dealing with websites. Screen class is just for apps. And then I'm going to change this. So for the rows, we're going to have, let's say, page path, and then I'm going to make columns. I'm just going to get rid of device category. So we've got the page path and then the users. This is for a company called Bundilla Pest Control. They're a pest control company in Sunshine Coast of Australia. So if you live there and you have pests, you should probably call them Bo's Great. And he also lets me show off his data for demos, which I really appreciate. Okay, so let's say we want to see people who, went to, let's see, value packages. This is an important page, and then did ultimately convert. So the very first thing I can do is I can right-click on here, and I can say create segment from selection. And what this is going to do is it's going to include users when the page path is value packages at any point in time. So they viewed the value packages. And then I'm going to apply that. Actually, I can apply that just as a segment. And then I'm going to create this again because I want to create two different segments just to show you how it works. And I'm going to create value packages and create segment. But now for this segment, it's going to be and convert. And then I'm going to say include users when it's that and then what you're looking for is key event. So you're saying is key event exactly matches. Where is it? Exactly matches and true. So you can see where they viewed this page and they had a key event that occurred. And so you can see in the summary, we do have data showing up, which is great. And then I can apply that. And then what you can do, for example, is let's say I want to view the landing pages of people who just viewed that page versus the people who just viewed that page and converted. So I'm going to add back in landing page as a dimension. And I know I'm going kind of quick. I just want to make sure we don't run over on time, and you'll get to watch this back. So usually I go a bit slower in my actual demos. Okay, so now we have our page path. We're going to change this now over to landing page. This is where people started on the website. And you can see we've got some not sets. These are the tab hoarders. They're typically tab hoarders for how to identify a cockroach because people like to keep that page open for some godforsaken reason. I don't know why. And then we're going to put on our segments. So we have a segment of people who just viewed the value packages, and then the people who viewed the value packages and converted. And then you can see here that we've actually got people where they've clearly left some tab open for a while and then they converted. And then you can see where people are landing on the site. And so a lot of people, of course, are landing on value packages. But you can see some other people, Sunshine Pest Control, etc. And you can visualize this in a number of different ways. So you could turn this into a line chart, a donut chart. You can also just export this, for example. So you can click on export and send it out to Google Sheets and do some more analysis there. Or going forward, if you want to say, I want to know people who specifically did this and then converted, the best thing to do is click on these three dots, and then you can create an audience. And then from this point forward, anyone who looks at that page and then converts will be put into an audience. I'd recommend setting it to the maximum duration. And then audiences do get pulled into Looker Studio. So you can go into Looker Studio and say, give me everyone who qualifies for this audience versus everyone who qualifies for this other audience, for example. And so I find that creating an exploration, right-clicking on fields for various, criteria of how I want to view the data, and then you can create a segment, and then you can create an audience for the segment. That's really one of the easiest ways to create audiences. And audiences are not just for Google Ads and remarketing. They can be used for all sorts of different stuff. So yeah, I really like going through this process, and I'm actually just going to create this audience now. And so now if I go into the audience and I view it, it will show me the audiences. You can see this one I just made today. It's going to say total users less than 10. So it will say that until it actually starts to gather data. If a week from now it still said less than 10, I have set up the audience incorrectly. Something's wrong. But you can see here we've got YouTube link clicks. This is just one user. I set this up specifically so that I could show what happened when you have just one user in an audience. It will say one if there's just one person. So if it says less than 10, it either hasn't happened because the criteria hasn't been fulfilled yet, or you set it up wrong. One unfortunate thing, though, is you can't actually edit audiences after they've been created, despite this option right here where it says edit. You can only edit the title and add an audience trigger. You can't actually edit what's in here. And they only start building, as I mentioned, from the moment you create them going forward. So definitely that is something that I recommend setting up pretty early on in your GA4 process. Okay, next question. Related to audiences. For the audience, these actions have to happen in the same session, or does it cross over? It's up to you. So if I go into a new audience, I'm just going to create a custom audience. There's this item here. So there's condition scoping. And the options are across all sessions, within the same session, or within the same event. Across all sessions means it's users. And remember that if you're not tracking user IDs and sending those user IDs off to GA4, as in you don't have a login on your website, a user is just a device. So across all sessions would be across all sessions on that device. And then within the same session means it has to be in that specific session. So you'll just need to check the scoping on what you want to do. And something interesting that I often will do is I'll make a user scoped audience. Like this one here is user scoped, for example, and then you can make a copy of it. And then I can change the condition scoping to say within the same session, and then see how those numbers change as well. So that's something else you can do in audiences. All right. I don't think we have any other questions. Oh, Jessie, tab hoarder. I know she is. Jessie's on our team. Jessie hoards a lot of tabs. She is the not set problem that you're having. Just FYI, it's her. All right, everybody. I think that's it for questions. I could probably remove that banner saying to ask questions at the end. All right. So before I let you go, I'm going to put the presentation back up so you can go to my link tree to get information. And drum roll, our next webinar, May 27th. We're doing it a week later than usual, with Will Reynolds of Seer Interactive. I'm really excited about this one. I think it is going to be so much fun. Will is still deciding on what his title is. If you know Will, you know he's kind of a last minute kind of guy. So he's working on it. But I am really excited for him to talk to us about what I think the presentation is going to be about is about AI and thinking about where your audiences are. And I've seen a little bit of a preview of it. We've been having some phone calls, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's not yet published, but I'm going to make sure to invite everybody who registered on LinkedIn. I'm going to invite you to the next webinar, and yeah, look for that on our Kickpoint Playbook page. All right, and if you're on YouTube, of course, follow us on LinkedIn. If you have any other questions or don't get the email replay when it goes out, which I believe it will go out tomorrow at the latest, if you don't get that, definitely DM me and I'll make sure to send you a link. Thanks so much for attending. Thank you for the awesome questions, and I hope you found this valuable, and I will see you again next month. Have a great day.